Paul and I had the pleasure of meeting Anna Tarns at Mike Berners-Lee's book launch. This was back in March,
Mm.
and she brilliantly interviewed Mike about his book, A Climate of Truth. And so we are very excited to have Anna with us today and to explore climate storytelling and the role of journalism in addressing the climate emergency. Anna is an environmental broadcaster, journalist, senior environmental editor at The Conversation, and author of Go Toxic Free: Easy and Sustainable Ways to Reduce Chemical Pollution. And I really recommend this to anyone that is at all interested in the topic, even if you know a lot about the environment. Um, you'll learn. You'll learn a lot from reading this book for sure.
Yeah,
So thank you, Anna, for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me and thank you for the lovely introduction.
wonderful. So I wonder a good place to start maybe. There is a view of journalism, or one view of journalism, that it shouldn't affect the outcomes of the stories that
Mm.
it's describing. Now, I imagine solutions journalism, the kind of journalism that you're working on, has a different take on that, but it's not lobbying or advocacy either. So how would you describe solutions journalism and the role that it can play?
It's a really interesting one. So I would say solutions journalism for me is a form of investigative journalism. It's looking at the responses to a problem. So it's not saying this is a silver bullet, this is going to fix everything, because nothing is. But it's looking at how scalable something is, what the barriers are, quite analytical, quite critical, but also hopefully amplifying the progress and the innovations and the change makers who are doing amazing stuff. Um, the beginning part of your question was really interesting. So there's a lot of debate in journalism about can a journalist be an activist? Like, is
Mm,
campaign journalism a good thing? Is it a bad thing? And I think every journalist has got their own line that they draw. And there have been moments where I've put myself into the story and I have been a bit more proactive in voicing my concerns, for example. But normally, day to day, I would say I'm reporting on what everyone else is doing. Um, that said, I do think there's a really amazing way that solutions journalism can be a catalyst in terms of amplifying solutions and showing people what's possible, because so much of our problems today are rooted in the fact that people can't visualize an alternative. They can't see what a greener, fairer world would look like. We're kind of
mm,
stuck in this can't really change position. And so my sort of quiet form of activism behind my laptop is really about trying to motivate people to see those other alternatives and hopefully engage in them, hopefully want to take action and not just have hope, because that's a very passive thing. I think be actively hopeful and be part of that collective that is pushing for change and calling for action. Um, yeah.
I wonder, just to bring it to life with an example, and this may or may not be an example, so you can tell us about this or whatever other example you might like. But we couldn't help but notice that you have a radio show out right now, The Secrets of the Sea. So, to what degree could that be an illustration of solutions journalism? And if not, maybe tell us about it anyway, but give us another example of
Yeah.
how an example of your own solutions journalism in practice.
Um, so this series for the BBC is absolutely solutions journalism. Well spotted. Thank you very much. um, but it's not sort of it's not labeled as that as such. It's a bit more subtle. So it's a bit more integrated into the story. So the first thing with any journalism, as is the case with marketing, any storytelling, is you meet the audience where they're at. So this is for primarily a regional BBC radio audience. So they are not experts. They're not necessarily know anything about the marine conservation issues that are happening. They might do, but they're definitely not scientists. And I've done 6 episodes interviewing 6 different marine scientists from Exeter and Plymouth universities about their work and about their passion for their work in the simplest terms. So it's not going into the details of methods and things. It's very broad scope, but it's looking at how their work is tackling things like overfishing, climate change, um, finite resources, biodiversity loss, all of these things. And I could have made those programs in X number of ways. And I think the way that solutions journalism has impacted my interviewing techniques is the framing of the questions and the
Mm.
structure of the programs. So I was really clear about wanting to show the positives, but also picking up with each expert about what are the hardest bits about their job? Why hasn't this been scaled up already? Where is this happening? Why can't it happen everywhere? Like really digging into the nuances of that
Mm.
and exploring it. So not being frightened of the negative, tricky bits,
Yeah.
but looking at how their responses to these problems have come about and what the potential of them is. And through that, we then talk about how they became to be marine scientists or um, the issues around climate change, for example. Lots of other things hang around that. But I think with solutions journalism, it's very much about the framing and
Mm.
also thinking about the impact of that work as well. So, one example is there's an episode about an offshore mussel farm, which is basically growing mussels on ropes. So, in a 3D habitat in the deep ocean, which would normally be not empty, but not having these ropes in, and it's creating habitat for fish. So the fisher boats around are benefiting from this spillover effect because there's more biodiversity, because there's more places for the fish to breed. And so it's really kind of taking quite a holistic view at who is benefiting from that solution and who are the people, what are the responses that the scientists has had from the fishing community
Mm.
and what the feedback is. So it's not just about we've got this tech and we're going to fix this. It's about, okay, we've got this, we're working with the community, this is how it's evolving, and it's much more interactive, I think, in terms of thinking of all the different parties within that space.
Mm.
So yeah, so I just tried to bring that framing into my questioning and into the structuring of each program.
Yeah. We had an earlier exchange with Will Hutton, and he has cited the work of Diane Coyle a few times. So I've been paying extra attention to her since. She runs something called the Bennett Institute for Public Policy at the University of Cambridge. And a point she made in an article is from her perspective, um, think tanks and academics can't necessarily assume that leaders are going to want take this, to take the right decisions just based on evidence.
Yeah.
And that actually academics and other researchers and solutions developers need to think more about going over the head of business leaders and politicians and reaching a broader public with their message so that it creates an environment in which the right thing is better rewarded. Does this, how does this kind of, does that resonate with you and
Mm.
in your work? And what kind of perspective would you have on that?
Exactly. I mean, I think voting is probably the most powerful thing any of us can do in terms of creating change. And I think the same goes for climate science. Facts is not enough to convince a climate denier.
Mm.
The science is not enough. There's got to be an emotional connection. There's got to be a pull factor. It's got to be a better, cheaper, easier, like fairer future, not just more sustainable because it's worthy. And so I think if we can show that that's what people really want and are demanding of our leaders, whether it's business leaders or politicians, that's where the collective voice is really important and powerful because they're going to do what the voters want because they want to keep the voters, right?
Mm.
So, kind of linking all of that up, which is what Mike Berners-Lee does so beautifully in his book as well, kind of really thinking, yes, we're just individual people, but actually we have a very loud voice when we work together. That can be really powerful, I think, which is really exciting.
Mm.
Yeah, and you're senior environmental editor at The Conversation. Some people may not be familiar with what you do there, so it'd be great for you to share a little bit about that and the challenges of working with academics in that
Mm.
space to bring those facts to a broader audience.
Of course. So we're quite an unusual news website in that we We're a charity and we work directly with academics at universities. So we commission academic experts to write about their work or to comment on news or whatever it might be. But we're writing for for a mainstream audience, so for the general public. So my job as an editor, and all of us as editors, are journalists basically working with academics to translate their complicated work into something that's really compelling and engaging and relatable and accessible. So a lot of it is about media training with academics, as well as collaborating with them on the pieces to really simplify the jargon, not dumbing down, but kind of making it really easy to read and telling stories about the science or whatever it is. So that people can imagine things, they can visualize what the research entails, they can see why it's relevant to daily life. So it's helping to get academic research out of the silos, because so much of it is happening and it's brilliant, but it's not getting beyond the journals or the universities. So our job is very much kind of trying to bridge that gap between scientific expertise and everyone else. And it's a bit of a translation game, really. But I do love it. I love the variety. I get to speak to the most amazing academic experts in environmental science and marine science, for example. And I'm learning every day. But also, it's always a challenge when you get a really tricky subject to think, right, okay, how am I going to tell this story? How can we transform this? And it's really lovely to see when it's published that it's actually landing with people. And yeah, it's brilliant.
It's fun that you talk about it being a translation exercise, because I'm also going to point people to the article you wrote based on the observation that so much climate science is written up in English. And
Yes.
that actually this creates a problem for non-English
Yeah.
speakers, and that a lot of the non-English speaking parts of the world already who may be disproportionately affected by the climate and non-proportionately having contributed to it. So fascinating article. But actually, so the conversation, as I understand it, covers sort of a variety of things, but within the conversation, you personally are particularly focused on the environment and
Yes.
climate change. Now, if we look at the facts, last year was the hottest year on record, the first to breach the 1.5 degrees temperature rise since pre-industrial levels. I know that that becomes official once it's multiple years, but it
Yeah.
was the first individual year to do
Yeah.
that. 124 unprecedented extreme weather events. Um, and there's an argument that we're somewhat well informed about this. I mean, there's climate anxiety, we're so informed about it. And yet, our action on climate seems to be receding rather than advancing. What's your sense of what underlies that apparent disconnect?
So I think, so psychologists would call it cognitive dissonance, where we just aren't kind of connecting the dots, really. I think with climate, it's scary, it's big, it's not very tangible. I mean, yes, you can see a wildfire or a flood, but it I think we get quite numb to it sometimes when it's in the news. And I also think because it's not one solution, we need systems change, which is a very complex thing to get your head around and imagine and think, oh gosh, how can just me be part of this? What is my role in that? I think it can be really overwhelming. And it's just really hard. I mean, I think political leadership is frustrating. I think regulations are incredibly slow to change. And this is where I think the opportunity is, in that I think businesses are much more like a little rib boat and are able to pivot more quickly than a big government that is like a sort of tanker or a ship that is kind of heading one way and can't really move very quickly or change direction very quickly. I think business has got a really important role to play in shifting the landscape. And if business works together to put pressure on the government to change regulations, for example, and make that norm better for the environment and everything else, that is really brilliant. So I think in Mike Berners-Lee, in his book, he talks about the triangle of business, individuals, and government. And you need all of those three. there's pros and cons to what each of those can do. And I think us as individual consumers, citizens, putting pressure on businesses can actually help speed things up. And I think if we can do that and start seeing more action, I think that frustration will, I think that cognitive dissonance will hopefully decrease. But it's really hard. And this is why I go to solutions journalism, because news avoidance is a real problem. Like there's loads of research out from the Reuters Institute that gives evidence on how people are just not connecting with mainstream news as much as they were. They might be getting a lot of misinformation from social media, for example. And actually, by cutting through that news cycle and those headlines that just kind of go over people's heads sometimes, it's almost like grabbing people's attention and saying, like, it's not all doom and gloom. There is something we can do about it, and this is the way to go. And I think that hopefully tries to bridge that gap. I'm not saying we don't need normal news. I think we do. We need to know the stock reality of things. But I think there's a place for more solutions journalism to try and connect people to what's possible, because it is scary. And if people disengage, they're not going to act, basically.
Yeah. I'm always amazed at how many people I meet who just
Yeah.
don't watch or listen to the news because they don't want to know.
Yeah.
But in your experience, are there ways we can frame our storytelling on the climate emergency to try and cut through that resistance, cynicism, disbelief, or overwhelm?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it depends on what you're trying to tell a story about, I guess. But I think with any massive issue like that, I would say the starting point is to zoom right into a local story. Where are the people doing something, or where is there an example or a case study of something happening, and then broaden out to the bigger issue or the bigger story. So there's no point starting every article with, oh, climate change, it's really big, IPCC, like 1.5. Actually, tell me what's going on. Tell me who these people are. Give me, like, set the scene. Give me an example. Take me somewhere. Let me visualize something happening, and then add in the studies and the facts and the context. But I think if you can capture people's imagination and let people's passion come through, and show that something's already happening as well, like it's not all theory, there are some good things happening already. I think that can help cut through that disconnect a little bit. So I think that is, it's hard to give advice without thinking of a specific example of a, of a potential story, but I would say story is the key. Like if you can really zoom into the story and think what is the angle, rather than thinking of climate as this big topic, like it could be a huge textbook, for example, really kind of think, right, what's my angle for this pitch or for this that interview or whatever. I think that will strengthen it and make it stand out and be more original.
Yeah. And I know that you and your daughter have in the past done some campaigning around plastic pollution, and that may be a very specific type of way that you dug into the story. But it'd be great to hear more about that and how it led to writing the book.
So my daughter's 13 now, slightly scary. This all started when she was about 6 or 7. And I live in a coastal town in the south of Devon. And it was a few weeks after the regatta week when loads of boats had been out of the estuary throwing water balloons at each other. And we were still picking up water balloon fragments from the beach. And I just thought, this is nuts. This is completely nuts. We kind of rely on tourism. It's a beautiful sailing place. Like the water is so precious. There's seahorses here, like there's rare biodiversity, and we have to look after it. And I kind of took a breath and thought, okay, I want to do something that is going to have an impact that isn't preachy. And my kids were there helping me on the beach. And I just thought, I really want them to know they've got a voice as well. And I came across a charity called Kids Against Plastic, which had already established this Plastic Clever campaign. And it was all about inspiring businesses, so hotels, restaurants, shops, etc., to cut down on single-use plastic. It wasn't about cutting it out completely, but wherever possible, ditching it and going for a reusable alternative. And it was also it wasn't the same as the kind of plastic-free narrative, which feels to me quite impossible. It's not realistic. Like it's just the plastic clever thing was more about a mindset and an intention, and that awareness was starting to kind of spread through town as we started approaching these businesses. So over a couple of years, I think we got about 60 or 70 businesses in our little coastal town signed up as plastic free, ditching all the straws and the cups and the bags and all of those kind of things. But we also did a lot of events. So we did lots of assemblies. My little daughter spoke up at lots of primary school assemblies, bless her, and she did like live TV and all sorts. Um, and we created a bit of a community in terms of paddleboard action people, I suppose. Like we did lots of paddleboard events where we were picking up plastic as we went. Now that I know that's not going to solve the problem, but it was about connecting people directly with the issue and giving them that sense of agency. And then that all had ripple effects. And so people still talk about it locally now, like years later. And it's people are really proud of it. And that we got to the point where people were approaching us and wanting to be part of this campaign. And it was really powerful because it taught me how if you tell someone that they're doing something bad and telling them off for something, they're going to constrict and retreat and move away from you, and they're not going to want to be your friend. They're definitely not going to want to sign up to activities that you try and entice them with. So it was very much coming from a place of we've noticed this, we really care about this marine habitat, and we'd love everyone in this town to play a role in improving things and protecting it for future generations. Also, because she was 6, 7, 8 at the time, it was a very innocent voice talking to like hotel managers. Obviously, I was with her, but she was genuinely explaining it. And there were moments where we were sat on a sofa in the foyer of a big hotel, and the manager literally, Ella was talking to him, and the manager came over and called his bar manager and said, right, can you just order some of these paper cups or whatever for the gym? Or like, I can't remember exactly what he asked for, but it was that instant. It was like, oh my gosh, what are we doing? It was like a veil had been lifted. Like, why are we ordering fossil fuel based stuff? And I don't think, I mean, I must say, I don't think bioplastics are the answer. And anything throwaway is pretty pointless unless you desperately need it for medical reasons. But it was a step towards more reusable things and to more sustainable living. And it spread. It was really brilliant to see people, and also when we did assemblies, the children would go home and tell their parents to please stop putting cling film on my sandwiches. And like they were lecturing all these, I had all these parents come up to me in the playground saying, I've just been told off for this and had to stop buying this or whatever. And it was brilliant because they were giving the grown-ups a good run for their money. So it was really about planting a seed and letting that go and seeing the ripple effects. And if we'd have come at it from a very don't do this, like aim for perfect kind of attitude, I don't think it would have gone anywhere. But because we were with people and it was very much like, come over here where we're plastic clever, we're not perfect, but we've got a better way of doing stuff, join us and come on a paddleboard and pick up some plastic. And it was very friendly, open, not critical, and it worked. It really worked. And yeah, people still talk about it now. The boat race that involved the water balloons got banned, which was quite an achievement. And yeah, it kind of had a legacy, which was amazing. And the biggest legacy for me personally was the fact that my daughter has got an incredibly strong sense of environmental stewardship, and so is my son now as well. Like they know right from wrong, and they know, like the other day we were in the park and someone from school trod on a mushroom and broke it, and they were horrified. And I was so proud because I was like, they feel the same, like they feel that this nature is part of our world and we are there to protect it, and to see them feel that is incredible.
Mm.
Please do raise your digital hand or just put your hand up like this if you can't find where Zoom has moved it. If you have something you'd like to comment on or ask a question of Anna. But it'd be great to hear more about how this kind of the world of plastic pollution then led you into the
Yes.
greater topic of the book.
Yeah, so at the time it was kind of we started the campaign before Blue Planet 2, and then that all kicked off, and the whole world was talking about plastic pollution. And it dawned on me that obviously plastic is very visible. Unlike climate change, you can hold a plastic bottle, you can see it, it's everywhere, and it's something we touch every day. Then I got thinking about, okay, what happens when that plastic bottle breaks up into microplastics? What about the chemicals that go into that plastic bottle? Like really zooming out of that supply chain and thinking, what happens before and after we see a product or we see something or we see a problem? And it really wasn't being talked about. So a bit like climate, chemical pollution is really diffuse and abstract and also quite scary. I think a lot of people are maybe traumatized about chemistry from science lessons at school and think it's all difficult and complicated. And so I really wanted to try and use my climate storytelling skills, I suppose, to make chemical pollution and the solutions that go with it more digestible, I suppose. That's a bad word to use. Um, but to make it less scary. So to make people realize that my cup of tea here is it's chemicals. Like we are surrounded by chemicals. We would not have our computers and Zoom without chemicals. So it's not inherently bad. It's how we use things and how we manage the systems and how we throw away stuff. And also for me, when I was writing the book, I was thinking, gosh, this is going to sound to people like there's another thing to worry about. Oh my gosh, we've got to worry about chemical pollution as well as the biodiversity crisis and the nature crisis and the climate crisis, etc., etc. But actually, if we solve chemical pollution, we solve so many other things as well. So both chemical pollution and the climate crisis are fueled by this overconsumption of stuff. We have so much stuff and we waste so much stuff. And so much of this stuff is made of petrochemicals. It's made of fossil fuels. And as soon as we see that and we think, gosh, okay, if I buy less stuff, I'm having a lower impact on the environment. Suddenly, it's not just about carbon footprint, it's about that whole environmental impact, which includes chemical pollution. It's about that sort of sense of stewardship and looking after the planet. Suddenly, it makes sense, I think. It's all linked, and it's not like, oh gosh, mental load wise, I've got a whole nother problem to worry about. It's like, actually, that's another way into our disconnect with nature. And because it is about the stuff in our homes, like in the book, I go through every room in the house and talk about what's in your bathroom cabinet, what's in your kitchen cupboard, all of those things. It's stuff we see every day. And by making little changes, we can start connecting with those supply chains and thinking about how we're doing things differently. And I think that's a really powerful way to make it immediate and make it relevant to people.
Yeah. Martin.
So I thought it'd be interesting to speak on this, given what you've just said. How do you deal with the nut jobs like RFK Jr., who are doing kind of what you're saying in terms of like be worried about chemicals, be worried about this, but like being worried about the wrong chemicals, putting misinformation, talking about things that are just like whatever the worm did to his brain, like there's just all kinds of people out there talking about this, and therefore you have an even more difficult, like I've got to prove my story is right compared to their story, and they've got this loud voice. So you have to be holier than thou and more strict with your facts and to be
Mm.
right all the time. So it makes it even more difficult. It's more like rigorous, whereas they like say whatever they want to a certain extent.
Yeah.
How do you like do deal with that challenge?
So two things. So at the conversation, one of our health editors is particularly brilliant at busting myths she finds on TikTok slash RFK Jr.'s Twitter feed, and just getting academics to just lay out the facts and explain the truth and look at the
Mhm.
studies and really kind of calling out that misinformation. But I think another part of that is not just about those kind of health scares and things like that. It's about encouraging people to think really critically about where their media is coming from and where their information is coming from. And this is something that I think is missing from our some of our education systems potentially. Like kids, adults, everyone is getting information from their phone all the time. All those notifications from social media. I don't know how many people are actually thinking about what that person's agenda might be or who funds that platform. And I think we need to be holding them to account a lot more. And so it's not really just about individual stories and individual cases. It's about getting people to really think, okay, where are my trusted sources? Is that thing I've just seen on YouTube actually true? Who could have made it? Like, is it AI? I don't know. Like
Yeah.
really thinking, okay, finding your trusted sources and talking to friends and family about this as well. Because I mean, I've got a friend who I found out recently her mum is a flat earther. And I'm just like, okay, this is here. This is like down the road. It's people
Yeah.
are believing these things, and it's so inherently intertwined with their belief system. You can't just come at them with facts. I don't think getting into an argument with a flat earther is particularly useful either. It's not gonna necessarily be constructive, but fact checking and also explaining to people that you can't balance fact with opinion. So a lot of media platforms do this, and the BBC is one of them. I often hear interviews where you'll have a climate expert and a climate denier. And it's like, well, but we know climate science is a fact. We don't have to go there and have that discussion. I've been pitched against a climate denier on a chat in BBC Radio Scotland a few years ago, and I didn't know I was going to be. And it was the most awkward thing because I was like, hang on a minute, I was not expecting this. Um, but we have to accept that certain things are fact and we don't have to justify them. It's accepted science. It's there. And so really getting people to notice being when fact is real and when opinion is being portrayed as fact and being able to identify the two. And I don't think that many people are aware of the need to do that.